We always start with our own little discussion in an effort to warm you guys up so you'll be more forthcoming.
That's us, where we go.
We're gonna warm them up.
So
So I'll start. I try to start with loaded questions. Anybody can answer. As you all know, this is our 10th year celebrating 10 years of hard work and trying to give you all a really gift, or many gifts, so that you go out of here and really are inspired by lots of good piano playing, lots of different approaches, to chart your own course and make your own future, and contribute to make the world in what I call a better place. So my first question, anybody can answer this. This year our theme is Legacy of the Piano and the Planet. And of course every year we celebrate the legacy of the piano. How can we help it? It's the best instrument. But aside from that, this is the legacy of the piano and planet. And you may know that this year the Friends of Piano, which supports this whole thing, donated money to help the humanitarian and the cause of the Ukrainian people. And we also planted 1,000 trees for reforestation. And my, well, simple as that, this is my festival, and I really support the future of life, the future of music, and the future of the planet and the human race. So, what do you say, or what would you like to say to this particular group about the future of music, the future of the planet, our legacy, our earth that we live on?
It is a lot.
I know.
It's sort of like Opus 111. How do you answer it?
Well,
Did you ask that to the other panels as well?
I
think she was inspired by his when he
No, I've been thinking about this a lot. My second question is, we can do that one first, is, and I've been thinking about this a lot too, like for 2 years. How have you, and how have your students, and how has your teaching been affected by not only COVID, by just the difficulties that the world is in, which seem to be increasing? Another loaded question.
Yeah, you said earlier, Rebecca, when we were having lunch, that the world is changing so fast. It's hard to keep up with it, especially when you are involved in timeless pieces by Beethoven or Mozart or Bach or things of this sort. And I find that the farther away we get from Mozart's time or from Bach's time or something, in some ways the music has less relevance if it's rooted in the ethos of its time. But I'll explain what I mean in just a second. But in some ways it is more important than ever before. To find the elegance of Mozart, I mean, sometimes I'll ask my students, who do you know who is elegant? That elegance is fading in the world. And this, actually, I didn't understand Mozart as well as I do these days, however much that is, until I actually went to Vienna and saw the architecture. I even just passed through the airport and I already felt I knew Mozart better, or just senses of proportion, senses of elegance, senses of charm. I asked my students, who do you know who's really charming? Since Debussy, that's what he valued most, you know, in people, is charm, and you need that in some of his music. And that kind of thing is fading away with the relentless drumbeat of whatever our modern society is, you know, that we have to engage with. But we must not lose these things that Bach stood for, that Mozart stood for, that Brahms stands for, you know, in this music. I think that's very, very important to wake people up to that and to keep it there. So, you know, when I was a freshman, my roommate and I, that was the time of the first Gulf War back in 1988. And I remember we were 18 years old and, you know, we just signed up for the draft, as you always have to do. And my roommate and I would say, you know, should we be serving our country? What are we doing with music after all? But, you know, the way that I've answered that question in the last 30 or 35 years is that that's what we do, that's important. It's always going to be relevant. It's always going to be significant. It's always going to be important to be giving that to society, and there will always be people with hearts open enough to receive that and learn from that. So that's part of the legacy question for sure. And hopefully, if you are awake to higher things, you will be awake to keeping on planting trees so we all have oxygen to breathe and that sort of thing.
You know, when you were talking about Beethoven, I had this feeling, I mean, most of you don't know that when I was a kid, I had a very serious eye problem, which is how I met Dr. Ray 40 years later. And I had 3 surgeries, and at that time, surgery was much different. And each time my eyes were bandaged for about a month, and I couldn't see anything because both eyes were operated on. And, you know, of course, I don't know Beethoven, but, you know, my mother at that time said, well, just feel your way around the house. Well, it's not so easy when you can't see it all. And I spent countless hours, you know, fooling around the piano or doing something. And the point is that when you have, like, your hearing taken away, or you have your sight taken away, when it comes back, the world doesn't look the same. Because things have shifted. So that idea that Beethoven was removed, in a way, he was able to go further into his own world without distraction. And that is a remarkable thing. You know, I had a little teeny tiny taste of that. And of course, you know, we're not saying we want anybody to have a disability here, but I think that the bottom line is you have to be able to remove yourself from the difficulties and the atrocities that are going on around you in order to reach inside and reconnect and do something from your heart and feel somebody else's heart.
Well, I think in a way too, this generation, your generation, you can't overlook the access that you have to resources that we didn't have, that previous generations didn't have. So in some ways, you are closer in order to find what that capacity is. You know, your access to social media, your ability to travel, your ability to read and have access to anything kind of instantaneously. Make use of it, you know. Always be open to the things that lie close to you, that kind of lead to the inspirations in these from the past.
You look like you have a thought.
Well, I thought that the experience of the last 2 years, COVID, put us in isolation from each other. And it taught us how valuable human communication is. And that is what music is all about, is to communicate through soul, to share the great value of music and to do it in a live environment where you can do it in concert or in lessons, in communication with each other. That is so valuable to us as human beings. And I think that's our past and it's our future, is in being able to communicate with each other through the great works of art, such as music.
Do you think the students have been changed in their learning or their ability to relate by the 2 years of isolation?
It would be interesting to hear
Have you
them.
guys feel that you've been changed? Would you like to tell us about that?
How did this experience, the COVID experience, reflected your communication through music? What?
Would anybody like to speak? You're welcome. Go ahead. Take your.
It makes me feel more like the crisis of classical music after the COVID, because all live performance in certain areas in the world are restricted. But also reminds me how important right now the social media, the video website, and all the technology, the streaming technology, the recording technology can
I have a question for you about that, actually. So we all listen to lots of streaming media, of course, and lots of recordings, as it were. Do you or does anyone have a different response to the actual sound when you hear it live, as opposed to hearing a recording?
It's totally different.
How is it different for you?
I would say listening to live performance is more organic. Of course, the recordings can be perfect through advanced technology, the good how wonderful the microphone, how wonderful the audio interface you have. But I would say live performance is more unique, more organic, but is less accessible for the audience around the world.
Sure, but actually my point was about the sound itself. Do you hear a difference between recorded sound and real sound, as it were? Do you have a different message or a different feeling from the real sound? And the reason I ask is that I don't know how you guys feel, but I have noticed over the last 30, 40, 50 years, piano is getting brighter, you know, everything like this. I'm sure we've all seen this as things have, and we lose something in the sound and in the color and in the meaning for that. And I especially hear also with recorded sound and live sound. I mean, I can learn so much more from live sound than recorded sound, although there are great recordings, for sure, absolutely. But there's something different. It's so easy when you hear recorded sound just to turn it off, you know, to move on. I don't think I've ever actually listened to an entire YouTube performance all the way through. You know, I just check tempo.
So would any of you like to share what your feelings are? Because, you know, this whole festival is about sharing and communication, and we'd love to hear if you have any questions on any topic or any feelings. We would love for you to share. Yes. Can you take your mask off?
In response to like talking about differences between live and recordings, I think necessarily just because recordings are so easy, like the distraction is always in it, and you can just, the knowledge that you can do anything, you can just go away, you can turn off, whatever, that's always there, and so there is necessarily like just not the same effect, but also necessarily there might be things that I experience better in recordings, and then like in the times where I have actually like forced myself to like sit down and watch like a recorded recital of it as if it were live, I think that there were some things I gained from that I might have missed had I actually been there live, and in those cases there can be even greater emotional impact in certain areas than if I couldn't have them.
Thank you.
To me personally.
Anybody else?
I just want to say that
Yes.
recordings, and especially video recordings lately, of course it depends what kind of recording, what kind of equipment, what kind of engineering. But to me, I'm losing a lot of times, not always, less in the old recordings for some reason, the historical recordings, when we hear Rachmanov or Kortov. The personality, the atmosphere gets away, and sometimes it is shocking. Talking about these competitions now, which are streamed around the world, and so it happened to me that sometime I was listening to the competition through the video, and then I came to the real hall. And what I thought about the people who were in the recording, it was completely opposite. You know, they were lost. There were almost geniuses there. In the recording, in the hall, there was nothing. They couldn't communicate.
Interesting.
That's such an important point.
So, my experience is like that.
Well, I think too, live performance is so much more filled with a soulfulness that one can feel in the hall, as well as sort of a vulnerability that we know a lot of the recordings that we see or hear have been digitally corrected and are near perfection. There's something about the vulnerability of having at this moment in time that brings an excitement, but also just something that's much freer, and one can participate in the moment more. more fulfilling.
Well, I think you noticed while Professor Harding was playing the depth of the length of the chords, especially the second movement. To me, it was incredible to be with him all the time and to wait for the tilt of the sound to be connected with the next chord, which is something that we pianists don't know how to do, basically, because we play a percussive instrument. And so it was incredibly nice for me to experience this. And I feel that we are so lucky because we can have those experiences, almost like stopping time. When this happens, the speed of the society that we live on disappears completely. If you listen to the Arietta, you just disappear, you just forget that you live in the 20th century, and that you just experience art at the highest possible level. And I think this is our mission as performer and your mission as next performers, to make the world aware that we don't have to run all the time. And being European, I have to say, I feel that I'm running more here in the United States than what I was doing before. I feel that things are too fast, always too fast, and we lose the possibility to experience this incredible deep art. And that's part of our mission. And going back to live concerts will help this, because you don't feel probably the same, as my colleague said, in a recorded performance. A live performance can open your eyes much more. It's our mission to continue this. And going back to what you said before, I'm sorry to hear about your eyes, but my little disability is that I'm colorblind. I've never seen colors in my life, but what my luck is that I see colors through music. And I always tell my students, I speak about colors even if I don't see them. And I feel blessed because I can see them through music.
So how do you feel about the fact, I mean, I don't know who has perfect pitch or not,
But I do have
do.
perfect
And
pitch.
how do you feel about the fact that the A keeps going up and up and up and up and up? Because that's another thing that goes, you know, so it makes it more tense. And my feeling is that there's the color and the richness of the sound is affected by the higher, you know, the more highs we have in the note and the higher that A gets, compared to older pianos. I mean, Cortot and Rachmanov didn't play on such pianos where the A was so high. And it makes an enormous difference. You track that too?
Well, I don't have a pitch, so I just listen to color, but and I agree with your argument that it is a little bit of a problem, but it's been going on for hundreds of years. I mean, I'm sure Bach would say, you know, that the A is much too high. You can't get the richness of whatever you want. So that I just don't like how when things get so bright and so high, all the coloristic possibilities become very ironed out and narrow and straitjacketed.
And also tempos are getting faster and faster.
Sure.
I have a theory about the higher A, and I think in some ways, classical orchestras, I think, are dictating in many ways the rise of this pitch. And violins sound incredible with the higher A.
Yeah.
So I do think the shine of the strings kind of have promoted this uprising of this pitch, little by little. You know.
We're surprised that on the pianos it doesn't work that well as on the strings.
You know, I think that this, relevant to what some of you have said and also your initial question and COVID, I mean, time is a very fluid concept. You know, and I think COVID certainly affected all of us in the way we perceive time and how we experience time during that period, and not knowing when it was going to end. I think, you know, it's especially was horrible for all of you, I think. You know, I mean, for students of all ages, actually, you know, because their social interactions were taken from them, their ability to performing artists. I mean, of course, I'm not talking about us, but you guys, I mean, you need to play, you need to hear each other, you need to be being friends and playing chamber music and all of this. And I mean, time under any circumstances, I think for some people it's a real thing. But for many artists, it's sort of it's a confusing thing. You know, I mean, I have very weird senses. No, I can good time for music, but for life, for things, I don't remember when things happened. It all seems sort of like a dream in a lot of ways, life, and music, and I think that it's hard. And then here you had some COVID outbreaks here, and you just sort of wonder if it's ever going to end, and things are taken away from you. And I just got back from a festival in Puerto Rico yesterday, and so there were some chamber music concerts. And of course, most of the concerts that I hear are piano concerts. I heard a bunch of chamber music concerts there also. And I experienced a real sense of sort of privilege, of joy of hearing these pieces that I know and love so much, Brahms trios and Mendelssohn trios and whatnot, and it was just, I don't know, usually I don't like sitting in an audience, but I just felt a communal sense of being there and everybody sharing this music and getting great joy and excitement from it and love from it. And I don't know, that's all. I just don't know and time, what we all did during COVID, for professional pianists, it was hard because we're all constantly preparing for the next concert and the next thing and the next recording and the next repertoire that you have to memorize. And we're always about trying to perfect music that we're playing. But all of a sudden we had no concerts, and it removed this sense of urgency about, like, let's say we're going to learn a new piece, but we didn't have to push ourselves to memorize it because who knows when we're going to ever play it again, And when we do start playing, who knows what we'll play and all this. And so I was really happy and proud of music students who were able to keep going, and whether it was through Zoom or through just your own initiative, or just to keep going. I judged this, there's Boston Amateur International Competitions. Amateur pianists came from all over the world and played. And during COVID, they were working like dogs, They were just, their inspiration for playing in the first place is just love. Ama means love, and amateurs, the word comes from love. And I was so proud of them, and so that they all worked so hard and got so much better and played so beautifully. And for a lot of professionals, it was really hard, and remains very hard in a lot of ways. And coming back, Roberto and I had some email conversation about this. We were just panting to get back on stage. And at least for me, when I got back on stage, it actually wasn't quite as joyous as I thought it would be. It felt sort of weird and uncomfortable the first few concerts,
Still does.
Anyway, I think there was a question back there. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question related to live performance and recordings. I think for the performers and pianists as well, that if we perform in a live concert, we tend to express ourselves more. And I think I found myself, if I'm in a recording situation, I pay more attention to the technical things. I don't want to make a mistake. And I'm wondering, did you ever come across that problem, and how did you solve it? Is there any way to improve?
It's a great question. It's so difficult. Personally, so my experience, I hate being in a studio, in a recording studio. It's something that I really hate, but it's part of our career to have recordings out there. It's also how, in a way, you continue the legacy of the teachers that you had, that taught you to play in a specific way. So I feel there's a little bit of a mission of putting recordings out there. But at the same time, as you said, it's not the result, unless it's a live recording, it's a result of a process that unfortunately needs to be perfect. And I say unfortunately because that's how things are. You cannot record a CD which has a mistake, but you can play a concert that has mistakes. And I actually prefer to hear that, a concert that does have mistakes, because it means that it's human. This human being on the piano is trying to make music and to make art at the highest possible level. So in my personal experience, I try to survive the experience in studio by, of course, being precise because that's what we have to do, but without forgetting that what you will do will stay forever. Also, think about this. The recording is a picture of that particular moment, which means that many times it happens to me that I listen to a recording that I made a few years before, and I hate it because at that time I felt music in a different way from now, for instance. So whatever you will do, it has to be perfect, of course, and it has to represent you at that moment. But go on and continue to think about the next things. But it's a very, very easy thing to be frustrated in a concert recording studio, I believe.
I think the better you, the advantages of technology also mean that you can, when you record, try to just perform, because you can always clean up mistakes, you know. So if you can forget about having to achieve perfection when you're playing, because it doesn't really have to be perfect, you can go in and fix things later, you know. And having a good producer also is very, very helpful. They can tell you, oh, come on, it sounds routine, or try, play this faster, try this, you know, that can sometimes help a lot in the session.
But I think it attests to the fact that performing and sharing music is really a very communicative process. When we compare the best recordings of some great artists, for me, inevitably, it is the live performances that make the strongest musical impact. No matter how many mistakes, I mean, those are negligible. It's the message that music sends that makes the most impact, the most difference.
Well,
And those are the live recordings.
Stanislav mentioned Cortot. I don't know if you ever heard Alfred Cortot's recordings. There are plenty of mistakes. I don't know. If you listen to Backhaus, I remember I was young and I listened to Backhaus, you know, Wilhelm Backhaus, Brahms piano concertos recording. It's full of things that now you will not accept from a piano student, basically, from a technical point of view. So mistakes, things that are not even, but still they stay in the history of music. Like.
But there was that switchover, you know, because I remember, I must have been a teenager, well, maybe, I don't know how old I was. I heard a live performance recording of Richter playing the Rachmanov preludes, and in the big B-flat prelude, he got, as they say in Yiddish, farblungen, and the coda was, I mean, I loved that live recording because it was a statement to me of, wow, even Richter could take a wrong turn. It sounded like Schoenberg and Berg. I mean, it was like, and then he just came out of it and he finished it, and even though it was, you wouldn't want to have that happen to yourself or anybody, you know, it was great. And I never been able, and then that record disappeared. I lent it to somebody. I don't know, you know, I never heard it again, and I would give anything to find it, because it's a really, you know, it's just a wonderful statement about what happens in live performance.
There was also Horowitz's return, historical return to Carnegie Hall with the Schumann C major fantasy, and the coda of the second movement
That was cleaned up.
was later cleaned up. But who cares?
I think it's important for people to hear, you know, all kinds of live performance, because we're all human here.
Speaking to the legacy, in many ways I think your generation is sort of poised to be able to make a difference, especially after all that's gone in the last couple of years. You're pursuing something that allows you to have the vehicle to make a difference, you know, to make the world a better place. Sometimes if you're pursuing things that aren't as artful or an ability to express or so forth, but you're in a position to really be an ambassador and to open the eyes and ears and hearts of every society, really. So it's
Could I
exciting.
tell a story from I'm an old lady, so the good thing about that is that post-Second World War, we were able to hear probably some of the greatest pianists and artists, some of who survived the war, came to this country, and from my early age, every week, I heard these pianists. Now, one of them, who was my absolute idol at that time, was Myra Hess, which is a name that is not so known by younger students today, but a very great lady who became a star very early in England and had a very quick worldwide career going well. Studied with Tobias Mattei, the great, I call him the Schnabel of England, but great teacher, and just her whole future ahead of her. But this was in the early 1930s. She was going really well, but 1939 came, and as we know the history, I think that's another important thing, is to know not just the musical history, but the world history, and what these composers that we play went through in misfortune, disease, lack of medical care, wars, Napoleon just going over the whole of Europe, and speaking of Beethoven, that's a fantastic historic. Anyway, for Myra Hess, she made a decision instantaneously. She cabled all of her managers, even the American manager, where she had enormous amount of engagements, and said, we do not know where this conflict is going, but for the rest of the conflict, I'm canceling everything and staying in my country. Not only did she stay in her country, but she began to organize what came to be daily concerts, all broadcast worldwide, but especially in her country, in England, with colleagues with great chamber music and soloists. They were in the National Gallery of London every day for every week. I have a photo of her in my living room speaking to the audience at the National Gallery, thanking the people who had sent money to continue these concerts. Now, if we know about the wartime and England's fate to be the absolute, that was where this war was going, was to decimate England completely. Hitler had his eyes on England. No matter, she had the concerts live every day, broadcast, filled with human beings who came for what I just feel maybe it's a truth that everyone knows so well, what music is about, and the communication of music. In this case, it was the uplifting for every human being that had hope in the world and had love for music and its power to lift. Now, to me, that's a universal truth. We all know that, but we are so lucky to be part of music. And we don't know where our lives are going, but we have something that we can hold on to with these mentors. And it was my idol of her playing post-war that she was able to come back. But as we know, those concerts completely gave hope to the public while London was trying to be bombed to the ground, and just like what we read today is what's going on, this evil that's here. But luckily, we have music. I have, and I'll just end with, I have two granddaughters who are about your age. And when the COVID came, my first reaction was, it's going to be the most difficult for young people. Some of them don't know where they're going. They don't have something like music. But in my experience with my students at Mannes, I was so inspired. First of all, we were able to get, for the students that were stuck it was New York where I'm from, we were able to acquire over 40 pianos and keyboards. We bought them, not rented. So I never saw anything but enthusiasm from those students to have the pianos that they could work on and the continuation of the music. So I just feel the granddaughters did not have that. My granddaughters and many others had a great deal of emotional problems from this terrible thing and we're still suffering from it. But we do have the music. And that I could see the difference in the students who had the instruments and the piano and this endless repertoire for pianists. There is no end to this beautiful thing that we have. We can turn the here and there, composers, great pianist recordings, we have that. And I know all of you are holding onto that, that's why you're here. So I thought I would add that.
Questions? Comment? Yes.
I kind of want to hear your topic. I'm curious if there are any books that have really affected you and inspired you that you recommend that we read as well.
Yes, I do. I'm a book fanatic. For music or just generally?
It could be anything.
Anything.
Yes.
Well, since we are hopefully serving composers, I have some favorite biographies. Alan Walker, in his late 80s, lives in Hamilton, Ontario. I first met him in my teenage in London because he's English, he worked for the BBC, he was a great figure in England. Moved to Hamilton, Ontario. He started the Liszt Festival, the Romantic Festival. He wrote for 20 years on Franz Liszt. I don't know if you've read any of the volumes, but I would say from his writing and his evocation of a day-to-day living with a composer, it's about the best in my idea. Now he's done the same for Chopin. I don't think anybody, but perhaps somebody is going to better this one. But this is a great biography of Chopin. Took him 10 years. Liszt took him 20 for the 3 volumes. He told us all of this when he was promoting this book a couple of years ago. Beethoven, Jan Swafford, I think a professor in Massachusetts, right? And incredible. Again, a daily journey he wanted to make him a human being and that we would all love the person. That's great. I could go on, but I'm not sure that so many students today are reading enough. There's so much access to the internet. And these are kind of, we used to call, if we cheated, if we had a test to give, we had something called Cliff Notes. That was a sort of short version so you could know enough to pass the test. For me, very much the Google and the Wikipedia, all that, is like Cliff Notes. But great books who go into the research. Alan Walker has research that nobody has gotten because he actually spent 10 years going to Poland, getting recording, records that nobody had gotten before. Extraordinary work he's done. So anyway, those are some that I can recommend.
Murakami.
What is it?
Harumi Murakami.
Or what?
Murakami. Harumi Murakami.
Murakami, yeah.
He's a novelist.
Uh-huh.
Who else would like to ask? Here we have a whole bunch of really interesting people. And you might be sorry if you don't have something that's on your mind, because we won't be here too much longer. Yes, stand up and take your mask off so we can hear you.
I have a question from sound production. So I'm wondering that how can one have keep having a good sound when wanting big dynamics and effects? Because I'm wondering how can I find that fine line of powerful, effective, but not ugly sound, especially when the performer gets so emotionally involved that might just feel like more effects from the piano.
Obviously, being in this academy, you're learning from different people, different ways of playing. The That's one thing. But about the sound, I think, we were talking about books now, right now, which is extremely important. And yes, I agree, youngsters are not reading.
Not enough.
However, we have much more bigger problem. They are not listening music.
Live.
And that would be some part of the answer to you. Listening and live with music constantly. You're a musician, you have to walk around, you're listening and learning. But of course you have to know what kind of recordings also you listen to. Yeah, you ask, what is better? I don't mean you have to listen on the piano, right? Orchestral, chamber music. This is the voice, obviously, orchestra. This will change your approach. You will hear sound differently. In sound production, you have to have great developed imagination. You cannot, of course, a lot of people are playing with that, just they have direct approach, whatever, they learn mechanically that the sound, but imagination changing everything. So, just listen to music. It's my thank you.
Because unless you feed your imagination, you won't be able to find your way. It's not like you go to the supermarket and pick out a can of soup. You have to feed your soul and your heart, and that's what he's talking about.
And speaking about imagination, Fleischer used to say there are 1,000 ways to touch the piano, to have 1,000 different colors. And this is about imagination and listening to what you can achieve from your fingers and try different ways. And of course, each of us could tell you how to produce sound in specific ways because that's how we play or how we tell our students to play. But then each of us is different. So something that I may tell you may not completely work for you, but you have to find your way. And that's again listening and imagining how you can achieve and how you can improve.
You have to imagine the sound, not react to what you're doing, but imagine it before you make the sound.
I have another thought. As a teacher, I found today, speaking of sound on the piano, that the art of pedaling is something almost not around today to be thought of. We have this percussive instrument here. Without the art of pedaling correctly, we don't have a sound that's attractive. So there, I think there needs to be a reawakening of the role of great pedaling in great sound on the piano. And I find every year it's less and less concerned with how that enhances and beautifies, enriches the sound. And I've sometimes fallen on the floor in a master class warning the student that I'm going to work their foot, and they hate it, especially guys hate it that I'm down there. But it's reacting to the harmony, reacting to the phrase, reacting with your foot. And I hope I can touch a little on this on Thursday, because Schumann had a very strange way of marking the pedal. Very odd. One word. With pedal. Con pedal. Then what? We gotta hear it. He trusts us to hear and he's all very often mixed up harmonically in a sense that he's shifting underneath the voicing. And unless we catch that, we won't. So yes, I will still warn people in master classes, I'm gonna fall on the floor, and like a skier, work the foot and make the sound jump and come out. That's just thoughts for you, for the pianist, is be more conscious of great pedaling according to harmony. Chopin must have been a genius from the beginning. He just knew what to do, obviously, because people write that he was a finished pianist by the time he was 12. Now, it must have been perfect pedaling at that point, because nobody said he ever had a messy pedal. So these are thoughts to think about.
Yeah, and again, it's experimenting and learning by what you do. When I was competing in competitions, judges would come at the end and tell me, "Oh, your pedaling really shows the great Italian legacy of pedal." And that was not true, because nobody taught me ever how to use the pedal. There's no legacy of pedal in Italy whatsoever. It's just experimenting. That's something that I tried myself. But I agree, pedaling is incredibly important, and we don't speak
The
about
art
it.
of,
Actually, there's a book written by son of Arthur Schnabel, Karl Ulrich Schnabel, about the pedaling. So it's worth to read. You can get it.
I think it's ironic as well that we play a percussive instrument, but most of the music we perform and study are not derived from that style tradition, right? And so I think, Pry would often say that he always tried to emulate the sound of a singer, and Alfred Brendel often said he wanted his piano to sound like an orchestra. So I think it's using the imagination and having kind of a template of what kind of a sound you want before you play. And very often it's not the sound of a piano. Is it a singer? Is it a flute?
it's
Something
something.
this full string section, beautiful orchestra or something.
Yes, absolutely. So the more you can make the piano sound not like a piano, the better the sound,
Not like a mechanism.
the better the imagination.
It might be interesting that we, pianists who know Steinway pianos, which I've grown up with and I love most. I have a 50-year-old 9-foot that I bought just by a miracle that many years ago. It's not weakened 1 ounce. And if you make a beautiful tone and you let it sit, maybe, I don't know, I don't want to exaggerate, but at least 5-10 minutes, you'll hear it. That's a great piano. It has a tone that has the vibration that lasts that long. Not all pianos are like that, especially those today. But that's imagination. You can hear the vibration of a singer.
There was another Fleischerism. He used to tell us that we should have 3 ears. One ear is you're imagining what you're going to do, what the sound is. Your second ear is hearing what you're actually doing. And the third ear is constantly trying to find balance between what you want and what you're doing and try to make it work.
Anybody else? Yes. Take your mask off so we can hear you. You, hang on.
Oh, so I feel so privileged to be sitting here and, having this discussion, because we're all pianists, we share the same language, we all speak language music, but part of your job after we graduate and after we go transition into a new phase, like our job is to communicate with an audience that are not musicians, not pianists. So how has your teaching been different if you taught any non-pianists? And what's one thing about the piano playing that you really want to pass it on to the world?
The message from the composers, not us. Yes, it has to come through us. And luckily, we want to be exactly ourselves. We don't want to sound like anybody else if the teaching is allowing that to happen. But it's the message. We have these great works of art. We want to know what they had in mind. I mean, I definitely had a lot of revelation today in your playing of the Beethoven. Schnabel's recording would sound different, but equally convincing. That's what we want is our individual voice, but giving the voice of the composer. I definitely had Beethoven today, definitely. And I think we all did that heard it. We can have Leon Fleischer play the same piece from another angle, but it would have that truth in it from the composer's voice. That's my feeling, is that there's too little of that kind of wish today, that we have works of art from these great geniuses that we want to tell their story. And it can be infinite. Every one of you could have a different way, as you say, of playing. But it's their message. I'm always saying I'm not interested in how you feel about this and what you want to do, so much as why did Beethoven do what he did. And you were so enlightening about that piece. That's one I haven't performed, so that's a good thing. I don't know reference at all, so it comes fresh. And that's what we would love performances to do, is to have the composer come freshly to us in revelation.
I have a slightly different take on that, like for instance, if you're playing to people who are not sophisticated or who don't have a music background, and let's say you're not even playing Beethoven, let's say you're doing some live improvisation, or you're doing some Gershwin, or, you know, where there's room for Gershwin's voice, but you're, I mean, my take is, I want to give people a gift when I play the piano, whether it's a heavy gift like the voice of Beethoven, or on a much lighter note with different kind of music, just the gift of, I want them to fall in love with the music. I want them to have what I would call a very personal, life-changing experience, because I really believe that if people love music, when they get bitten by the music bug, I mean, I think if enough people got bitten by the music bug, we wouldn't have war. We would have peace. And I think that, I mean, I'm not putting down competition winners, I think that's great, but all of us have the ability to, I mean, infect is a bad word, but help people get hooked into music as love and peace, and just to a higher power. That's, so, you know, like if you're walking in to play for a group of kids or old people's home, which, you know, I hate to use that term, but, you know, whatever environment, there's plenty of room for that. Even to play, you know, a profound piece by Beethoven or another composer, like the beauty of the Chopin nocturnes or anything like that is just like extraordinary.
I had the opportunity when I was still living in Italy to play. There's a league of musicians who play for free in cancer hospitals to terminal patients. And I have to say, those are the moments where you feel, and I never felt like that after a concert, where you feel that you're doing something useful, and you feel the importance of what you do, and that music can really cure, or
Yes.
even for a second, or for a minute, give peace to people suffering. So we don't have to forget about this.
You know, I don't know if there's been studies done. I'm sure there are studies of where people who, let's say, play the piano and you feel the vibrations, the vibration of sound, I think that keeps you healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that it's anti-aging, and we're all so privileged to be able to move in that language and share that language.
That's right. There is an organization that was started in COVID by some of my younger colleagues called Music and Healing. And they were going in COVID into hospitals, especially New York, and performing, just playing simply and lifting the spirits of the people, many of whom expired. But before they did, they could hear the truth, that I call it the absolute truth of the beauty of music is beyond us. What did Beethoven say? Beyond all philosophy, beyond music is the greatest. It's true.
Okay, and on that note, we're going back to lessons. And we have a wonderful masterclass tonight, and thank you all so much for coming, and thank you all for all these great insights.